we can't control that, right? We can't control how the other
Well,
person
also
receives
the
it.
person who's used to being enabled will use some very nasty language, and the nasty language will go in because most people are sensitive to being called a blankety blank if they say that you're a evil, horrible blankety blank.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you practice ruthless compassion, you have to understand that not everybody's going to like it. I've had patients call me a cult leader. I've had them call me abusive. I've had them call me a bully. Now, that's a very, very tiny, tiny minority of them who've done that. But those are people who were so resistant and so stuck in their pattern that the littlest, tiniest limit, one person was chronically so late, so late. She showed up. My session was 47 minutes. She showed up 5 minutes before the end and then was expecting to have those 5 minutes and then my 15-minute break as a like a half session. And when I said, no, that's my break. And she said, but you're not doing anything. You didn't see me, so you have the time. And I kept saying, no, that doesn't work that way. Then I was abusive. So when people who receive even the kindest and gentlest of limits really don't want them, then they can definitely throw horrendous things at you. So the person who's practicing ruthless compassion has to understand, I'm not being cruel. I'm not being abusive. I'm not a bully. I'm not a cult leader. I'm not a monster. I'm just a person who is doing something that these people are not used to experiencing. And that there's a little tyrant in all of our heads, right? There's a little tyrant. It's that little 3-year-old, right? Who's like going to have a tantrum and it's going to stomp its feet and it's pound its little fists and scream. It's cute when it's 3. It's not so cute when it's 30 or 50 or 60. But, some people, when you set a limit and they're not used to having any limit set, they're going to pull out the big guns and their inner tyrant is going to start screaming. But that's
Thank you.
their problem, not ours.
Well, this is fascinating that you just happen to bring this up because I have a 3-year-old grandson and, and a few other little toddler grandchildren. And the idea that there's a natural tyrant in everyone and we all have to learn to manage it, I think it's so important, but it's like taboo today. Like someone thinks, oh, you're attacking my child if you say that they have a tyrant inside. And I'm saying it's in everyone. But the current philosophy is that children are pure good, just like animals are pure good and hunter-gatherer people were pure good. And all of the tyranny you see in their relations, that's the subject of my new book, Why You're Unhappy. So that's all just ignored. And then like people are all defensive if you say, that that child is acting like a tyrant. It's always assumed that they're expressing a legitimate need and you're not sensitive to it.
So that does a couple of things. Number one, it fails to teach the child how to behave in proper society. So it encourages their antisocial behavior. And it also makes the child feel very insecure because the way that children learn to feel securely attached is by having, you know, limits and consequences and boundaries. And so when there's no boundaries and anything goes, then the kids actually feel insecurely attached, so that you create these anxious and badly behaved young people. So it's really, it hurts everyone. And then the people on the receiving end of all this bad behavior aren't enjoying themselves either. So it's not a good solution.
And it spirals on itself because then that tyrannical behavior becomes entrenched. The child perceives the negative responses and they retreat to the behavior that they already know. So it's very
Exactly.
sad. And in today's world, by the time they're 7 years old, once that pattern is entrenched, they'll be diagnosed with something and they'll be medicated for something. So I'm wondering if you've seen that happen.
I've seen that, and I've also seen them grow into people who are now leading countries or trying to lead countries, you know, and they're absolutely nightmares because that tyrant is completely in the forefront. So, we really need to recognize that, um, everything has light and dark in it. That's why I have ruthless compassion. It's like the yin and the yang, right? Everything has light and everything has dark in it. And it's not that I'm a Buddhist. It's just practical common sense, right? It's very obvious. Like you say, you work with animals. Animals are loving and altruistic, and they're also vicious and ruthless. So are humans. We all have light, we all have dark,
Hmm.
and it's just silly. It just makes no sense if we only choose to see one side. It's just as silly to only see the dark, but we have to take a step back and see the big picture. And if we don't see the dark in our kids or in other people, then we fail to raise healthy kids and we fail to protect innocent people from dangerous individuals.
Now, let's look at the flip side. Let's say that a person really is not respectful of others and very selfish.
Mhm.
And they justify that by saying, well, I'm just having ruthless compassion for other people. Do
Yeah.
you hear you have people
Yeah.
do that?
Oh yeah, sometimes say I'm just being honest, but I always say brutal honesty cancels out the benefit of the honesty. The brutality cancels out the benefit. So ruthless compassion is a balanced state. So you are still being kind, right? And you're not doing it to be cruel, you're not doing it to be contemptuous, you're not doing it to gain power or to gain advantage. It's just trying to live in a more balanced way with yourself and with others. So you can also have ruthless compassion with yourself. So if someone says, I'm just practicing ruthless compassion, they can say it. They can say anything. They can say, I love you. Doesn't mean they mean it, right? People say a lot of stuff that's not the case. So ruthless compassion, if it's cruel, it's not ruthless compassion. It's just, wearing the name. But ruthless compassion never has cruelty, and it's never about trying to dominate or control. It's just about having, seeing the truth and setting limits and being loving but strong and, not putting up with nonsense. It has nothing to do with being abusive. So, yeah.
So let's use a less dramatic example where a person has someone in their life with a self destructive behavior, and I'm not being asked to pick up the slack and wipe up their vomit or anything. I'm just observing that they're in this bad loop and they're really harming themselves. And it's painful to watch, like a train wreck in slow motion. So, give us a suggestion of how a person can manage that.
It depends on your relationship because it depends so much on, what the nature of your relationship is, how close you are, and, if there's a power dynamic. You don't want to make somebody feel demeaned or belittled. So, and you clearly don't want to do it in a way where other people are around, or, you don't want to do it when they're feeling particularly vulnerable. So you have to find the right time and place, and you have to have a kind of relationship with them that you're not talking down to them. But let's say you're equals and there's some closeness there and there's some trust. I would say the best way to start is to say, it hurts me to watch what you're doing. It really hurts me to watch it. And I don't want to be around it because it's too upsetting. So, I'm just going to let you know that while you are choosing to do this thing, I can't hang around with you. I can't watch you, you know, throw yourself off the cliff this way. If you are interested in changing, if you're interested in support, I'm so happy to do whatever I can to help you or support you. Um, it's absolutely and entirely up to you, but I just can't be around you while you're doing this. I can't tell you what to do, but I'm here if you want to change.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So you said that in your practice, you help people confront the truth. And yet, the truth is really very fungible. We all have such different ideas of the truth. So, how do you help a person identify what is true?
Well, if somebody comes in with a bruise on their face and I go, where'd you get the bruise? Oh, I walked into a door. So I go, did you really? Well, no, my husband hit me, but he was drinking and he didn't mean it. I go, well, okay. And how often does he drink? Oh, 3 times a week. And how often does he hit you? Oh, most of the time he's drinking. Okay. So then I say, so he drinks 3 times a week and he hits you 3 times a week. Okay, how do you feel about that? Well, he doesn't mean it. He tells me he's sorry. No, no, how do you feel about it? Right? And so that's how I take them into that. And clearly they don't like it. But so there are some truths that are not that fungible. Like, there are some things that are pretty obvious. If your husband is hitting you, it's not okay, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
3 times a week or once, it's not okay. And there's no excuse whether he's drinking or he had a bad childhood. There's no excuse for that behavior. So there are truths that are more, vague, and there are truths that are pretty obvious and clear.
Mm, mm. Well, let's use a more subjective example. So let's say that you have a person who speaks in an insulting way to either family or coworkers,
Yes.
and they don't see that they're doing that. How
Yes.
would you help them see that?
Okay. Well, if I was their therapist, it would be different. If I was their colleague or their employee, it would be different because, you can't really tell your boss that he's talking to you that way, right? Or she's talking to you that way. You have to be a lot more strategic. But if it's somebody that you're close to or in a family, you can say, I don't like the way you're talking to me. I don't like your tone of voice. And they can try to gaslight you, or maybe they truly don't believe it. They can say, well, you're too sensitive, or you're being, nasty, or I never spoke that way. And you can say, well, you know what? Let's agree to disagree. I don't like it. So I'm just not going to be around you if you're going to talk to me that way. If you don't feel that you have a problem, there's nothing more for me to say. So I'm just going to, stay away from you. And if I see you at family gatherings, I'll be polite, but I'm not going to engage in conversation with you. Like you
But
can't.
what I was thinking about was the person who actually is the doing the insulting talk,
Yes.
and they think, oh, I'm just using ruthless compassion, but actually
Yes.
they're
No, that's
insulting
not,
and they
but
don't see
again,
it.
that's not ruthless compassion. I mean,
Right, exactly, but they don't see it. So how do you help them see it?
well, you might or might not be able to. It depends on whether they're willing. If somebody's saying, I'm just being ruthlessly compassionate, I can say, well, are you? Like, how do you, what do you, how do you see ruthless compassion? Like, what is the end game of ruthless compassion in your mind? What is the point of it? Because if the point of it is to just be, clear and strong, but I always feel belittled, maybe, and I'm not the only one, myself and all the rest of the family also feels this way. So if it was just me, maybe I'm oversensitive. But if it's the whole family feels belittled, perhaps it's you. And if they're willing to hear it, then they are. And if they're not willing to hear it, then they aren't. Because again, we can't control the other person. The one thing ruthless compassion cannot do is we cannot change someone, the way they think or the way they perceive things. That's their
Mhm.
choice. But we can point it out.